pre this year's voting, I read and heard so many comments from so many voters who declared that they would never, ever vote for anyone who played through the steroid era. Yet Frank Thomas, who played from 1990 through 2008, has now skated right on through unscathed. And I do not understand this. And for the record, I worked at the Chicago Tribune, as you know, and spent a lot of time around Frank Thomas's White Sox teams, 98, 99, 2000. So I knew the culture of that clubhouse. I want to be very clear about this. In no way, shape, or form am I suggesting or casting aspersions on Frank Thomas that he used any kind of PED, because I never even heard a whisper about Frank Thomas. I heard lots of whispers about some of his teammates. In fact, a number of his teammates. So he lived in that culture. So here's the question I have. Do we know for sure, for absolute certainty, that Frank Thomas never used a PED? No, there's no way to know. And conversely, I worked a lot on the north side of town with the Cubs, Sammy Sosa. I had great sources inside the Cubs telling me, Sammy Sosa, he's a steroid guy. Sammy's a steroid guy. I had it from the top, steroid guy. I would go to my editors at the Chicago Tribune, and they'd say, do you have absolute proof of this? No, I don't. One editor asked me, have you seen anyone inject Sammy with steroids? No, I have not. I'm sorry. So I had no absolute proof, and we did not write that. We didn't even suggest that. We didn't suspect Sammy in print through his years with the Cubs. But conversely, if you're saying that you're going to ignore others who played through the steroid era, in cases in point, Jeff Bagwell, Mike Piazza, because of suspicions that they used, have dropped in their voting. As of yesterday, they plummeted in their support for the Hall of Fame because of suspicions. Well, do any of those voters know for dead solid sure that Jeff Bagwell was a steroid user, a PED user of any shape?
Or Mike Piazza.
Or Piazza. No, I can't believe they do. Maybe they do, and I don't know. And again, I'm going to be very clear. I never even heard a whisper about Frank. But I don't understand how Frank can just skate right through unscathed and be in the Hall of Fame, and nobody even suggests anything. By association, you would think he would be damned by association.
Let me say this. I respect where you're coming from, and before I take my position, I want to reiterate that I completely understand that in no way are you saying that Frank Thomas has used PEDs or anything like that. So before I make my point, I want to make sure you understand I get that. I understand that is not what you're saying. Having said that, I still believe you're unfair to Frank Thomas, and I'm going to tell you why. Frank Thomas, career numbers, 521 home runs, 1,704 RBIs, a career .301 hitter, the greatest player in the history of the Chicago White Sox. His numbers speak for themselves, some of the things, the categories that he leads them in, et cetera, et cetera. Numbers aside, forget for a second that we are in America and you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. We understand that pretty much applies to the court of law as opposed to the court of public opinion. But in the case of a Frank Thomas, I think it's important to recognize that this is not a dude that sat by quietly, just went about the business of doing his job and wasn't attached to any suspicions, like the Bagwells of the world or the Piazzas of the world to some degree. This is a guy that was a staunch, vociferous, outspoken adversary of performance-enhancing drug use. Every chance he got, you heard a quote from him decrying the use of performance-enhancing drugs and talking about how the game itself, it's a problem.
Stephen A., we've heard that from many who were incriminated.
Yeah, we've heard that from many who were incriminated. But what I'm trying to say is they were incriminated. He was not. And so if he was not, but he's a staunch adversary against it, that counts with me. Because what he was saying is, I haven't done this. I'm clean. These guys should be clean. And then he went out and performed and dared you to find something. And we didn't. And we didn't. This dude, and I will remind everybody, walks around 6'5", 240 pounds. It's a big boy. It's a big boy. Now, he didn't need it. for all intents and purposes. But in the end, it says something about speaking up. See, because we live in a PC society in this day and age that tacitly, at the very least, if not overtly, pushes you to be quiet. One of the things that I talked about when we would bring up Donovan McNabb, for example, is I would say, you know, there's many occasions where the biggest crime that he committed, first-class individual all the way, et cetera, et cetera. The biggest problem was that he didn't speak up for himself enough. Well, Frank Thomas never hesitated to. Yeah. And that resonates with me. Listen, Skip, if there were suspicion, then you could go like this, yeah. But if there's no evidence, I mean, you worked in Chicago. And for people who forget, you were one hell of a reporter. Boy, if there was some dirt, Skip was going to find it. You were the Grim Reaper. They called me the Grim Reaper. No, you were the Grim Reaper, okay? You are in the city of Chicago, the second city, a beautiful city, a great sports town. Sammy Sosa's out. You heard all of these rumors. You never heard a word about Frank Thomas. And you're going to sit here and go like this. Excuse me, Skip. If there was something to be heard, people like you would have heard it. So so understanding that, I get the part about the hypocrisy, because to me, as far as I'm concerned, Major League Baseball, that's synonymous with hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. But in the case of Frank Thomas, I don't believe it's applicable. This man has been squeaky clean. He has stuck out his chest and said he's squeaky clean, and it has been decades, and we still can't find a soul that says this man has used performance-enhancing drugs, and oh, by the way, his resume is his resume.